Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. We're going to talk about some breakout wide receiver prospects for this season. Now, not prospects like they're rookies, but like guys that we can look at in our best ball drafts, in our season-long drafts, friends and family, whatever fantasy football draft you're working with, we're going to help you target those players. I have brought on the show a good friend of mine, Rich Rebar from Sharp Football Analysis. This guy is an absolute genius when it comes to breaking things down in a way that makes them make so much sense. So I love having him on the show. We talked about prospect wide receivers and running backs for the last 2 seasons. We've had him on the Cage Match show on the main channel. So thank you guys for being here. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football channel. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a reply. I don't know, share the video. That helps. Do all the things, click all the things that help us out in the algorithm. And let's go.
He's a legend.
Hey, Rich, how's it going, man?
Al, what's the good word, brother? It's been a couple months since I've talked to you. I always love kind of coming on and just talking with you because you're just someone that kind of just has fun with it, just enjoying life. In the summertime, we talked about some baseball and the kids' baseball earlier, but I always love just coming on here because I love the energy you have.
Thank you, man. I mean, look, we get to sit here and talk about fantasy football.
Oh, yeah.
And things that, like, look, some of this stuff's going to come true and some of it's not, right? We're not going to be able to predict the future with 100% accuracy. I'm sorry. I apologize ahead of time that I'm not going to do that. Rich might, but like, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Me neither.
Yeah. So we're going to give you our best swings at this. And Rich, first off, why don't you just tell everybody where they can find you on social media and find all of your content this year?
Yeah, I'm still at Lord Reeves on Twitter, still rocking the Zach Morris AVI, not going to change it. All the stuff I've done so far at Sharp Football Analysis in offseason, there's nothing paywalled, everything's open. I just did a series where I took a top-down look at like each positional usage. Can't even talk now, but where it kind of looks at like, you know, what's gone on in like terms of the NFL from a top-down, from a league stance, and then how they're using each position underneath that umbrella to kind of give us like a nice foundation when we start looking at the players and player projections and targeting players. How to handle these positions and trying to spot a couple like early trends of where the league is going and how they're using these positions.
Perfect. So you had a tweet a couple weeks ago. We had already decided that you were going to come on the show. We were going to chat about stuff. And then I saw that you had a tweet talking about wide receiver, not just wide receiver breakouts, but wide receiver ceiling breakouts and your methodology for getting that. Why don't you talk about it for a little bit? I'm going to bring up the tweet on the screen for the viewers. And why don't you talk everybody through it? I'll start you off. It said, if hunting for a wide receiver ceiling breakout, make sure he's on a team you believe can win / surprise. Over the past 30 seasons, and then you list a bunch of numbers. 6.1% of PPR wide receiver ones come with a team with 4 or fewer wins. So guess what, guys? Players on good teams have more access to scoring touchdowns. Shocking, right?
Yeah, and it's nothing, like I said, it's nothing like evolutionary to break down, but it's some things like we were in projection season, so it's easy to kind of look at base projections. You have a guy projected for a lot of targets, and his ADP is lower than kind of like where you have that median, and you're like, oh, well, there's a screaming value, and then we start to promote some of these players, but they might be on bad teams. They don't kind of have access to the ceiling that we want to like smash ADP. Like when we're talking about these best ball drafts, we want these guys that have like viable access to season-long ceilings can absolutely hit. And like I said, there's nothing revolutionary. The teams that win the most games also score the most points and score the most touchdowns. There's a trickle-down effect. Now, you might have a team like the Bengals who just surprised. So like, it's not just always going off of like team totals. It's always about like, who can you believe? Like, what if there's a team like the Lions or a team like this year that I believe have like an access to like a higher amount of wins, like without even being a playoff team, more so than like their win total is. I mean, it's a team that you look at, they fought hard last year. They lost 3 games on last second field goals. The offensive line's one of the better offensive lines actually in the entire NFL. Now the quarterback still is probably going to prevent them, but they play in a division that's like kind of more open than people think. The Packers are still obviously good, but you know, they've lost some like a little bit of weaponry too. So, you know, a team like the Lions could be a team that surprises, and you might get access to more some higher ceilings from the Lions players. But more or less, we can look at team totals across the league and say, all right, well, we can find some, you know, advantageous spots here for some micro edges where guys aren't being treated as maybe having the ceiling outcome and the range of outcomes that isn't fully priced in, and we can kind of work away from that. Now, I had the tweet from the previous 30 years because it was just the data I have. And then someone asked me a great question And it's like, well, how is it trending more recently since the NFL is scoring more points? And actually, it's trended even worse over the past 10 years, which is crazy, right? So over the past 10 years, and if you have the original tweet up or whatever, I can give you the numbers that compare to that. So it's just 5.8% of all wide receiver ones have come on teams with 4 or fewer wins, 15.8% on 6 or fewer. And then if you look at the arbitrary, like better teams, if you just have 8 or more wins, it's 74% of all wide receiver one seasons have come on those teams, and 52.5% on teams that have won double-digit games. And teams that have won double-digit games over this span only make up 33% of the entire sample. So, I mean, think about the hit rate of that. You know, you're getting almost a wide receiver one on over 50% of coin flip chance on teams that are winning double-digit games. Now, we have a good idea of the teams we believe can win double-digit games, right? So, I mean, we could shop in those lanes. We can find a few receivers maybe who aren't being priced in that price range as wide receiver ones, and maybe can hit that ceiling. A guy like a Michael Pittman, maybe even a Rashod Bateman, a Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, depending how you view that situation. And then if you look at it like a step further here, and we're looking at teams that produce like wide receiver twos or better, and you look at these teams that are producing just even like 8-win seasons. So teams that have won 8 or more games over the past 30 years, 89% of them have produced a wide receiver 2 or better season. And then if you have double-digit wins, 94% of those teams have produced a wide receiver 2 or better season. So think about this in context where guys are going off the board right now, and where teams like the Kansas City Chiefs and Green Bay Packers, if you have to legitimately believe that they're not even going to be a near 500 team, let alone finish under their totals and the win total lines, to not produce a wide receiver 2 or better. And both of those teams have guys going like well outside of the wide receiver 2 range, because there's ambiguity. We don't really know who the guys are to target. And we don't even really have to factor in like a guy like Travis Kelce into things, because I already said, like, we're talking an 89% hit rate of producing a wide receiver 2. So we don't even really have to factor in a lot of context. Like, well, what if the team has an elite tight end or elite running back? Like, you're getting just amazing odds on the surface level of just if the Packers or Chiefs are around a 500 team, like they're going to have a wide receiver 2 or better. So you can take multiple sprinkles on guys, whether it be Juju, whether it be MVS or Sky Moore, or even McCole Hardman. And then you've got guys like Alan Lazard and, Christian Watson, Randall Cobb, the Lizard King. All these guys are just floating out there, but like you can get a lot of these guys at really palatable prices. They have great floors and extremely high hit rate on team, attachment to these teams. And then, you always hear this when I posted this is that, like correlation is not causation. Good players make good teams. And this is inherently priced in, like team context is priced in, especially if you look at quarterback ADP and wide receiver ADP. Right now, the highest wide receiver in ADP on a team that doesn't even have a win total below 8 is DJ Moore. And he's like right in the mid wide receiver 2 range. And he's kind of the poster boy of this whole thing, right? Like we know DJ Moore is talented enough to be a wide receiver 1, but what's dragged him down every year? The quarterback playing team attachment. A guy like Terry McLaurin has been like that. Now this year, their win total is up there. He's a little sneaky. And then the only other 2 wide receivers in the top 24 in ADP right now that don't have win totals 8 or higher are Deontay Johnson and DK Metcalf. But that can impact like some of in these best ball leagues. Like I said, like what's the ceiling for those guys? Could their teams drag them down? Or what if you're in a draft and you're trying to make a decision between Michael Pittman and DJ Moore at ADP, or Marquise Brown and Deontay Johnson, or one of the Denver wide receivers? Or you get down further, like we talked about. I inherently do find Brandon Cooks and Darnell Mooney undervalued, but do they have the ceiling access of someone like a Rashod Bateman at similar ADP? Like, could they smash their ADP, obliterate their ADP? And history has kind of told us that no, they don't. Now, that doesn't mean they can't still be good draft picks or become a good value and beat ADP. Like, not everyone has to be a wide receiver 1 to have fantasy relevancy. But when we're talking about just accessing the ceiling and swinging from the heels or swinging from the fences, like a guy like Bateman in his range of outcomes probably has higher access and more probability to a ceiling than those guys, even though the floor is lower. So those are kind of just some ways we can kind of, like I said, find just like those micro edges and things that aren't like fully priced into cost on some of these guys, and try to use them to our advantage a little bit.
So let's focus in on a few of the guys that you had mentioned in that tweet. So I'm going to bring up here on the screen one of the first ones. I want you to talk about him a little bit. We spoke about how, you spoke about how players from winning teams tend to score more touchdowns. History has shown that that's the case. It reared its head last season with Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel being kind of league winners who were drafted between the 4th and 7th rounds depending on where you were drafting. So like we're focusing on players like that and Michael Pittman on a good Indianapolis Colts offense that I think is going to have improved quarterback play going from Wentz to Ryan. That's debatable depending on, somebody will argue the other way. Somebody will say it's just a lateral move. But Pittman looks like he is primed for a breakout. Now it's priced in on Underdog Fantasy currently, right? Like his ADP right now is like 31.3. So he's going in the third round. Talk to me about Pittman and his prospects for possibly a breakout this season. To me, breakout means opportunity for like double-digit touchdowns.
Right. And, Pittman's a guy, there's no shortage of fantasy analysts on this guy. Like he opened up like around wide receiver 21 and he's been nothing but climb, like ever since like that opened up. And you talked about it. I mean, you look at Matt Ryan, I actually am with you. There's a lot of peripheral stats that show that this is not a lateral move. It's an actual upgrade, no matter what you think about Matt Ryan. Because he outperformed Carson Wentz in a far like dystopian team.
Terrible situation for a quarterback last
year. And if you look at like Matt Ryan's on target stuff and clean pocket stats, which he didn't have a lot of with Atlanta last year, they're tremendous. Like they're high. They're like tops amongst the highest in the league. He just didn't operate with a lot of clean pockets. And this Indianapolis team, like they're in the right division. Like this is a team I love, like their win total. Like this is a team like I think is going to cruise the double-digit wins, barring like some elements like really fall apart for them. Get that great schedule. And you talk about Pittman, he's that alpha body type, the guy that can flirt with double digits just based on the type of like physical presence he is. And then you talk about the opportunity he has. The two wide receivers that were behind him in targets last year, Zach Pascal and T.Y. Hilton, are no longer even on the team. You've got a rookie in Alec Pierce kind of as the de facto wide receiver too. Paris Campbell, we know that there's some talent there, just been a little bit snake bit at the start of his career, but it's kind of just wide open for him to once again command a 25% team target share. And then if anything were to happen to Jonathan Taylor, which, we do not want that to happen, but if anything were to happen to Jonathan Taylor, like the whole construct of like this team, then default changes. They're going to have to be more aggressive passing, right? Like it's like there's a lot of ways for Michael Pittman to win, even though his ADP has really climbed since the course of like when drafts is opened. I still think he's a guy who's not going as a wide receiver one. I think I outright would rather have him than Arthur Juan right now. It hurts my soul kind of internally to say that a little bit because I love Arthur Juan, but I think I would outright rather have Michael Pittman than Arthur Juan.
Yeah, so for Arthur Juan, that is AJ Brown for people who are not up to speed on the way Reeves talks, but Arthur Juan is AJ Brown. He's saying that he would prefer Pittman to him. AJ Brown with the ADP of 23.4 right now. Our next target that we wanted to talk about here is Terry McLaurin, ADP of 46 right now, so a full round plus more or further behind. Now we're looking at an ADP for McLaurin that's similar to where Cooper Kupp's was last season. I am not saying that Cooper Kupp or that Terry McLaurin is going to be the Cooper Kupp of 2022. So just wash that out of your brains right now. But is he in a position for an uptick? We just talked about how Ryan was an uptick from Wentz for Indy. Wentz is an uptick from Heineke in Washington.
Yeah, slight. I mean, so I can go to bat for still believing Matt Ryan is good. And I'll defend that. But Wentz is more of a gray area. He's a little bit tougher because it could be a situation where this looks a lot like DJ Moore last year, where it's like, well, Sam Darnold is the best quarterback DJ Moore's had, and it's still just not good enough. Nope. It could be very much a similar situation. But Washington's one of those teams. Like I still want to kind of be early on because they were a playoff team 2 years ago. They had a bunch of injuries last year. And like, this is a team, when you look undercover, like the hood on their offense, like there's a good amount of talent here on a team that is going to play one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. I mean, you've got McLaurin, you've got Curtis Samuel coming back, you add Jahan Dotson, you've got McKissick, you've got Antonio Gibson playing healthy. Antonio Gibson is another guy that's got really dragged this offseason he basically played on one leg last year at 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, and everyone hates this dude. Mm-hmm. But seemingly Washington too as well. But then they've got one of the best offensive lines in the NFL too. So like Washington's another one of these teams like I believe can like thoroughly surprise. Now their win total is kind of priced in; it's at 8 right now, but this is a team that could still win double-digit games. I believe that is in the range of outcomes being in the NFC East. And having that defense come back too, if that defensive line can play like it did 2 years ago, which all that talent is still there, this is a team that could definitely surprise as well. We know Terry McLaurin talent is there. You just check Matt Harmon's workout where you isolate the receiver from his conditions. Terry McLaurin just soars off like on everything. 63% of his targets last year were deemed catchable, by far the lowest rate of all wide receivers with 100 or more targets last season. So yeah, we're still putting some faith in Carson Wentz, and maybe it is a Sam Darnold situation like last year with DJ Moore, but Terry McLaurin feels like far too low in terms of pricing and some of the receivers he goes around in drafts right now. I mean, he's going after guys like DK Metcalf, right? Like it seems like there's an opening here. He's going like right around guys like Allen Robinson and Amari Cooper. And I mean, he in the 4th round, like I'm going to at least bite on that.
Okay. We're coming back to a player with a ADP around mid-30s, 33, 34. ADP is shot up for a couple of reasons. One, DeAndre Hopkins suspended for 6 games. 2, Marquise Brown showered with Kyler Murray for a couple of seasons. We have a situation where these guys already have a connection in a really good offense on a really good team that's going to play some up-paced games. Do those 6 games at the beginning of the season with Hopkins suspended, how much does that come back to earth after he gets back? Or are they still going to use Marquise Brown where they're going to utilize Hopkins in the short to intermediate stuff? Obviously, they're going to utilize Rondale Moore only behind the line of scrimmage. He is not allowed to run routes past the line of scrimmage. It's in his contract. His agent made sure of that, which leaves Marquise Brown to run the 15, 20-plus air yard routes all day long, which is where he wins.
Yeah, I'm really bummed about this. And obviously they made this trade as part of knowing Hopkins was going to be was going to be served as suspension. But I love this fit so much. I'm a little bummed that his ADP is shot up. So you look at Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray gets kind of like dragged throughout the process because he still has not his passing ceiling, right? And that's warranted. Like he deserves like any type of that shade. But if you look at Kyler Murray, he's progressively gotten better in almost every passing metric since he's been in the NFL. And the area where he's really thrived since he's entered the NFL is the vertical game. Kyler Murray has completed 41.5% of his throws, 30 or more air yards since he entered the NFL. It's the highest rate in the NFL. He's second in EPA per dropback on those throws since the NFL, only behind Justin Herbert. Now he loses Christian Kirk, who counted for 30 of his career targets on those. The next highest guy he's targeted was DeAndre Hopkins at 12. Well, guess who, since he entered the NFL, is among the league leaders in those types of targets? Yeah, Mr. Hollywood Brown. Only Tyreek Hill has more of those types of targets than him. But listen to this. When Hollywood Brown played with Lamar Jackson, he's caught just 9 of 43 targets on 30 or more air yards downfield. And 14 of those targets have been deemed inaccurate due to the quarterback per True Media. That's the most of those types of targets in the NFL. So he's going to now be playing with the quarterback that one he has rapport with from college, but also is the most accurate player since he entered the league on those types of throws. And also Arizona, they were number 3 in the NFL last year in catchable ball rate on targets to their wide receivers. So he's going to a friendly system. It's a bummer now that he's climbed, but Arizona is one of those teams that I think is really easy to stack, and you can get DeAndre Hopkins mixed into these stacks too. Because the great thing about DeAndre Hopkins in these best ball leagues versus a seasonal league is you can't IR DeAndre Hopkins in your seasonal league because he's suspended, right? Not a lot of leagues allow it. Some do it and some don't. So you have to eat this roster spot for not only 6 games, but their bye as well. So you don't have him for half of your fantasy regular season. But in these best ball leagues, you kind of build around not having him because he's a straight zero, get some replacement value costs, stack him up. Arizona, I mean, you look at in these best ball manias and the puppies, look at their playoff schedule.
Yep.
They play the Denver Broncos in week 15, shootout potential. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers the week after that, shootout potential. And then Atlanta in a dome, which could just be blowout or potential shootout potential at that point. Who knows? Because it's Arizona secondary. Definitely has a lot of questions coming into the year. And all these guys are pretty palatable in terms of draft costs to kind of build around. It's a bummer that Marquise Brown's price is climbed. His stock has climbed. But he's definitely a guy I'm still very interested in.
Rich, I love having you on the show because it's like you're like one of those toys that I had when I was a kid, like the Tron, the little Tron motorbike, where I just take the little vinyl string and I go, and I just let you go. And it's amazing. The amount of information you can just spout off the top of your head is outstanding. So now I'm going to line you up for 2 guys here because we're getting a 2-for-1 special. Earlier in draft season, and it's pretty early in draft season as we're recording this on June the 7th right now. But earlier in draft season, like a month ago, Jerry Jeudy had a higher ADP than Cortland Sutton. As of this morning, Cortland Sutton has now passed him at 40.5 with Jeudy at 40. So you're no longer going to be able to get both of these guys. They were about a half a round to a full round apart about a month ago. Now you've got Jeudy and you've got Cortland Sutton with Russ Wilson throwing the football. Big upgrade here in terms of their quarterback play. Obviously, that division is stacked on offense and on defense, right? Like Kansas City beefed up their defense. Las Vegas beefed up their defense. The Chargers went out and got just another edge rusher and a corner and everything to beef up their defense because of all the quarterbacks that they have to play. Still, we should be seeing totals between 50 and 60 in every one of those interconference games. So 6 games that we know they're going to have totals of 50 or above. Probably a team total of 25 to 30 in each one of those games. A lot of passing touchdowns to be had between the pair of Jeudy and Sutton. Is there one that you prefer over the other, and why?
And the interesting thing too is, a lot of people think like Russ is kind of washed, but you look at Russell Wilson on Seattle last year, he was 4th among all quarterbacks in passing points for fantasy per pass attempt. Think about that. 4th in the NFL. He's the only quarterback over the past 5 years to have a touchdown rate over 6% in all 5 of those seasons. We know he loves to push the ball downfield. You get those money targets. I think that's why the room has kind of come around on Sutton, because those like the types of targets Sutton's always earned in the NFL, the vertical end zone targets. And Jeudy kind of is more of a question mark. He really hasn't earned those types of targets in the NFL. I mean, shit, he's got 1 touchdown, right, in the NFL, through 2 years. The interesting thing about Denver is a lot of people want to correlate Jeudy is Tyler Lockett / Doug Baldwin and Sutton is DK Metcalf. But this is by far the deepest offensive roster Russ has played with in maybe, I don't want to say ever, but in at least the last handful of years, because Tim Patrick's way better than any wide receiver 3 Russ has had over the last 5 or 6 years. And KJ Hamler is way better than any wide receiver 4. The pair of tight ends and Greg Dulcich and Albert Okwuegbunam are way better than he's had in the past few years. And the offensive line is significantly better than what he had in Seattle. So, I mean, this offense runs deep. It's not just as easy as saying like Sutton's DK and Jeudy is Lockett, Doug Baldwin, and we can just run with that type of usage. I think Russ is going to lift the tide for a lot of these guys. And also the running backs are a little bit deeper than what he's had. So this is just a tremendous kind of like buy-in spot for the Broncos. People have caught in both guys. I typically, like I said, I do prefer Sutton because he gets the types of targets, those fantasy targets that are kind of so saturated and like high calories for fantasy football, like, the deep vertical targets, the end zone targets, the play action targets, all those things historically have led to more fantasy points, where Judy's need a little bit more volume. But Judy's still he could be like a Stephon Diggs type player too. Like that still exists in his range of outcomes. We haven't got to see the full ceiling. That ankle injury just absolutely nuked him last year when he came back. Think about this, the Denver Broncos last year. Think of all the talent they have. The final 8 games of last year, you know how many touchdowns the Broncos wide receivers caught last year?
I don't know, but I know you do.
1. Think about that. Think of what an egregious crime to have a team with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick. Hamler wasn't on the field. They caught 1 touchdown pass the final 8 games. Like, what the hell? That's definitely going to flip. You can get guys like Patrick and Hamler late, but I mean, you talk about the AFC West, like it's an arms race in the AFC West. These teams have just built the bunker up.
And look, you get improved quarterback play with Russ Wilson, and you get, I'm going to say, a better coaching staff in terms of friendliness to an offense, right? Like creating situations to get wide receivers and a quarterback on the same page and opportunities coming from Green Bay now to Denver as opposed to what they had before.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Denver is actually worse than Seattle in terms of like expected pass rate in almost every game situation. How crazy is that? And now you're kicking out, that dinosaur coaching staff. You're getting a guy like Nathaniel Hackett, who we don't have like a huge sample of, but it's all kind of just trending up. Like the Broncos have realized like they need to score points. It's not only in that division, but it's held like what they believe is a good roster back.
So now we have our next player who possibly could be a star. Rashod Bateman. Now, look, Baltimore is not a high volume passing offense, but we've seen Marquise Brown get a good amount of the targets. Basically, they don't throw the ball a lot, but they throw the ball a lot to 2 guys. One of them is their tight end, Andrews, and the other one is going to be that wide receiver one. It was Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown is now out of town. They may bring somebody in by the time the season gets here to move Duvernay off the other side and into like a wide receiver 3 role or a third wide receiver when they go 3 wide. But like Bateman could be a star. He's being drafted at around pick 56 right now. That's his ADP. So quickly talk to me about Rashod Bateman and your thoughts on him as a possible breakout candidate in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about just what's left in the cupboard. And we know Mark Andrews is going to command a high target share, but we also know there's going to be regression for Mark Andrews as well. So this gives kind of just a runway for Bateman to kind of absorb a lot of the target share that Hollywood leaves. And he's a little bit more versatile than Hollywood as well. You know, I kind of comp to Bateman coming out to Justin Jefferson coming out, not Justin Jefferson, what we have now. But one of the reasons I was really on Justin Jefferson, there's receipts for this too, is that he was a guy that played everywhere at LSU. He won inside, he won outside, he won vertical. And it was like, oh, this is the type of receiver that really thrives in the NFL now. This kind of receiver that you can plug into any spot and he can succeed. And that's what Bateman is. Bateman, you know, if you look at what he did at Minnesota playing along Tyler Johnson, then moving into the slot, having to be forced to play outside and then just be like the alpha, he just did nothing but perform. We saw him give us a couple of fleeting moments as a rookie. Remember, he started the year hurt, came back, and then we really get to see it all come together. And then by the time he was like a full-time player, Lamar was out, everything kind of died around that offensive line and team in general. So he does have the runway. He definitely has a little bit more of like an unevenness. Like there's a floor here too, because a lot of people will just say, well, Baltimore, they could easily revert back, be at the bottom of the league in passing. I'm not going to invest in that. But he also, when you're talking about like just a system that can produce like a bunch of points and a bunch of touchdowns, we only have to go back 2 years ago to see like Lamar Jackson win MVP, to see Lamar Jackson throw 36 touchdown passes. Go back to that 2019 Ravens team and look at the wide receiver core and think of the touchdowns that he threw that year. He threw 36 touchdowns where like his targets were a Hollywood in his second year that only played 14 games, Willie Snead, Seth Roberts. Like these are vagabonds. So even when you look at the Ravens depth chart right now and you say, whoa, after Bateman, like, whoa, what are we doing here? Like they were really counting on Devin Duvernay and Tom Wallace to step up. But go back to 2019, like it's still in this range of outcomes for like this offense to spike and produce points. And this is a coaching staff. Like there's not many coaching staffs I full on like believe in, like maximizing out the success of players. But the Ravens are one of those teams. They were in first place last year before basically like the football gods said like, hey, overcome all this. Like, and they just couldn't. Like it was just a tidal wave. But they were still a team that was in first place. Lamar wasn't even playing great football. So there's definitely, like I said, guys that go around Bateman, I believe he has a lower floor then, but there's definitely an outcome where he has like 8 to 12 touchdowns too.
Look, Lamar is clearly an elevator. He is an MVP candidate as long as he plays 15 plus games. And if he does that, that offense is going to move. It's going to move on the ground, but it's also going to have some of those deep shots, those big splash plays. And seeing Marquise Brown utilized in a short to intermediate role last year, at least when Snoop was under center, lends some credence to the fact that Bateman could see massive amount of target share as well as those big splash plays. The last ones that I wanted to talk about, you mentioned one player, and it was Michael Thomas. There's a lot of clouds around Michael Thomas. Is he going to play? His ADP is like multiple rounds higher than Jarvis Landry on the same team. So if Michael Thomas plays, I want to talk about two things here. So I'm going to let you go on this one. Go as long as you need to. Michael Thomas, if healthy and playing for the Saints versus, and then what that means with Jarvis Landry, both on the field at the same time, or if Thomas out, not going to play again for the Saints, what does that mean for Jarvis Landry in the same situation?
Yeah, I also believe the third guy here, Chris Olave, warrants a lot of look too. I mean, if you told me to blind bet on a receiver that would have the highest like fantasy like potential for this year, I think a lot of people would choose Drake London just because of the opportunity he's walking into Atlanta. But I would absolutely choose Chris Olave because he's going to play with the most functional like NFL passer of a lot of these guys that are rookies, play on a team that has more access to being good than a lot of these other rookies, and then comes with like that kind of like situation where what if Michael Thomas isn't healthy? What if Jarvis Landry, a player that's been trending down the past 3 years, continues to trend down. So I would include Chris Olave. Now, Michael Thomas on his own is a little tricky because we literally don't have anything positive yet. We've got like one video of him running in a straight line. That's really all we've seen so far. We know that they signed Jarvis Landry, which also doesn't kind of like make us feel good about like, well, where could we be with Michael Thomas?
They drafted a rookie wide receiver early, and they brought in Jarvis Landry.
But then his ADP as a guy getting all of this priced in, like it's just sinking. Like he's just getting price down. So it's like if somehow he is healthy, and we know he's going to command targets because it's all he's ever done in his career, even when he's not had Drew Brees as quarterback, because he wins in the intermediate level like really no one else does. Like no one else does in the NFL. I mean, you look at, I think Ian Hart's just recently had like a tweet yesterday that broke down like his yards per route run and target rate per route run and the types of routes he wins at. So like he's going to get a bunch of targets, and we know Jameis is capable. Like we saw it a couple years ago when he's got functional receivers like a Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, like he could totally facilitate getting those guys the ball. And then that system is changing from Sean Payton, but the offensive coordinator is staying in place. Also, Jameis is probably going to run a lot less this year than he did last year just because of the ACL.
Knee,
so we'll probably see him not be as mobile and get the football out of his hands. And we also don't know what the hell's going on with Alvin Kamara either. Like that's one that
there's
like,
a potential suspension coming for those who aren't aware of Alvin Kamara's situation. Like he may or may not be on the field for a number of games.
But the Saints are totally a team, like when you buy in the team level, like this is a team that could definitely surprise. Well, one, the second tier of the NFC we know is wide open. And particularly the NFC South after Tampa Bay is wide the hell open. Like they're probably, the Saints on paper are marginally better than Atlanta is, and probably Carolina as well. So like this is a team that can win games. Hell, they flirted with making the playoffs last year with another team. So the Saints last year, when I did like an offensive line continuity look at like what teams played the most 5 offensive linemen and the rate of snaps they played, the Saints had their top 5 offensive linemen on the field for only 15% of their offensive snaps last year, by far the fewest in the NFL. That was nuked. Alvin Kamara was basically their only wide receiver last year. Jameis Winston gets hurt in the middle of the season. And like that's a team that still almost made the playoffs. Like, so now if we have Michael Thomas healthy, we add Jarvis Landry, we add Chris Olave, the offensive line is healthier just by default. Now they did lose Taron Armstead. They did draft his replacement, in Penning, but, we don't know what kind of player we're going to have, rookie tackle, especially. But on paper, like everything objectively shows that like the Saints are going to be like a better team than they were last year too, as well. So there's a path for them to score points. And like any of these guys that are discounted and can run into targets, I think have to be entertained, especially a player that's of Michael Thomas's caliber. For him to fall now where he's going
67th is his ADP right now. Jarvis Landry is around 127, Olave around 95.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting Michael Thomas around player we talked about in Drake London, a Devontae Smith, a Traylon Burks, even in that area. I mean, in these best ball drafts, you get a lot of insulation and you can mitigate a lot of that kind of risk. You can be more risk averse. I mean, I'm still at least good because you're going to be early. All we need is Michael Thomas to show up to training camp, right? Like if Michael Thomas shows up to training camp, like that wide receiver 32, 67 overall becomes wide receiver, 23-ish? He's going at the back end, he's going like the 4 or 5 turn. So like, why not shoot now? Why not shoot your shot now? And especially shooting on Olave right now, because if Michael Thomas
he's out and Olave
up,
is the opposite wide receiver to Jarvis Landry, that means a massive uptick in terms of target percentage, target totals, and the possibility that if Kamara's out, that's even more targets to the outside wide receivers as well. So, Rich, thank you for being here on the show. I appreciate it. We talked you through, I think, 7 different wide receivers, 8 if we consider Olave in that breakout situation based on all the methodology that Reeves laid out for us. Target players on winning teams if you're looking for breakout seasons in fantasy, because that's where the touchdowns live. So thank you guys for being here. Follow Rich on Twitter. Look out for another video right there.
He's a legend.